No sex, no drugs, no alcohol. Does that sound like fun?
Not at all.
Sounds like straight edge subculture, this time on False Count Everywhere. Welcome back, False Count Anywhere. I'm your host, the varsity athlete Jeremy Baudet. With me, as always, Matthew, the Professor Lambert, discussing some of the more detailed, in-depth, interesting stories, subculture, topics in the world of professional wrestling and sports entertainment. And this week, I decided we cannot seem to get through a show without talking about CM Punk. And I thought, instead of desperately trying to avoid talking about him like we usually do, I thought it might be interesting if we kind of lean into it, sing the entire Doublemint Gum theme song through, and then maybe we'll finally be able to get it out of our heads. So I thought we could dive deep into the world of straight edge. So why don't we just start? You're the professor, but I haven't prepped you. You didn't know that we were going to talk about this. I literally just told you what we were going to talk about. Tell me what you know about straight edge subculture.
First thing that comes to mind, straight edge means no alcohol, no drugs of any kind, even like most or all medications. And for some reason, I think it has some sort of connection to like punk rock music.
Yeah, it does. It does. So CM Punk is probably the most popular wrestler today working that sort of identified himself with the straight edge culture. And what you find is that there are plenty of wrestlers that sort of live a straight edge culture, but they don't really make it a part of their identity so much. So 1980s Punk, rebellious, and right around the time that Sid Vicious died, killed himself, drug OD'd, still not exactly sure what happened. That was, 78, 79. It was the very, very end of the 70s. And there was this hardcore punk movement that rose up that really kind of identified with the opposite. They sort of saw the prevailing culture of music, kind of regardless of the genre you're in, as heavy in sex, heavy in drugs, heavy in alcohol. And so they kind of viewed
the Woodstock era.
But it was like, if you think about it, like all the music back then, it was all associated with drugs. Like no matter what it was, like, okay, like Christian music maybe, but like even Johnny Cash and Elvis Presley were well known in the 1970s for their wanton drug use and cheating on their wives and all that kind of stuff. So what this culture came to find was that the real rebellion had to do with sort of rebelling against the rebellion, which was like, okay, we're going to be punk rock, we're going to fit the punk rock genre, but we aren't going to live this extravagant drugged lifestyle that having that straight edge gives us an advantage over everybody else because our minds aren't clouded by anything else. So hardcore punk, and I'm going to read a description here, an aggressive, fast-paced, stripped-down style inspired by pioneers like Black Flag, Circle Jerks, Fear, Bad Brains. It does not sound like very good music to anyone that's actually a musician. It's a lot of like pounding on the drums, pounding on the guitar, 3-chord progressions, screaming out of key that you can't even understand. It's very rebellious. And as it started to work its way up, a particular band called Minor Threat actually came up with the term straight edge in a 46-second song called Straight Edge, which basically said, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't fuck, but at least I can fucking think. And so that's the whole premise behind it. The idea is being rebellious meant sort of being clean. There are many aspects that are unique to straight edge subculture. There are many different flavors, if you will. Some of them abstain from meat. Some of them abstain from caffeine. But sort of the one universal thing is a lifetime commitment to no promiscuous sex, no drugs, no alcohol, None of that kind of stuff. You're living a relatively clean lifestyle. So you might pass somebody on the street, and I'll introduce you to some straight edge performers that you may or may not know about, and you're going to pass them on the street, and you're going to like cross the street.
Right.
Because these guys do not look like people that you want to associate with. But as it turns out, they're basically the equivalent of an altar server, a Catholic altar server, because that's kind of how they are. Don't let the smooth coating fool you. They are very personally conservative with their lifestyle, but they tend to be very progressive in their politicking. Actually, it made me think of, it was about a little over a year ago, I think it was May of 2022, CM Punk came out at a show with a abortion rights are human rights shirt on.
Yep.
And it's that same kind of a thing. They're very progressive in their political affiliations. Again, lots of animal rights activism, lots of women's and reproductive rights, feminism, the quote-unquote anti-fascist movement. All that stuff is sort of very closely associated with the movement. What's interesting and where I think this, well, let me list some wrestlers besides CM Punk that are straight edge, and then we can kind of talk about how that straight edge culture bleeds and has actually, in a very interesting way, I think, impacted the world of professional wrestling and the culture of professional wrestling. One thing to say really quickly. The straight edge symbol is an X
On the hands, right?
on the back of your hands. Do you know where that comes from?
From under 21 going into clubs.
Exactly. When you go into clubs, that's how they would mark you that you couldn't be served to.
Right.
That actually first appeared on an album cover. Teen Idol's Minor Disturbance from 1980. There's like it's got like double X's on it, and so now you'll see people before they go out on stage. Jeremy, the lead singer for A Day to Remember, is famous for being straight edge.
CM Punk does it on his taped hands.
Yep, does it. That's like his symbol on his taped hands. So that's kind of where that comes from. But you will not see any of these wrestlers doing that. So I've got 11 of them. So number 11, Jinder Mahal.
Wow, that's not what I would have expected.
Jinder Mahal is, these are kind of in order from like popularity or like people you would know versus people you might not know. So Jinder Mahal, straight edge all the way. Hard to believe he's a heavy metal guy, but he is. Lee Moriarty.
Okay.
Straight edge. That actually came from the fact that his parents didn't want him to wrestle because of the culture of drinking and drugs and whatnot, and that was one thing that he did to convince them that he should participate.
Wow.
This one is definitely a guy you'd cross the street on. Brody King.
I had a feeling about him, yeah.
Very straight edge. And I think House of Black, which is the faction or the stable that he's associated with, I guess they'd be a stable.
Yeah.
That he's associated with, they all kind of look that same kind of way. The Viking Raiders.
Okay.
Both of them. Both very closely associated with straight edge. Claudio or Cesaro. Straight edge all the way.
Not the caffeine part. He loves coffee.
Yes. Again, there's different flavors.
Different flavors, yep.
But he's Swiss, obviously. You mentioned it before we went on air. The Young Bucks. Well known. Both Nick and Matt well known as part of the straight edge culture. Sammy Guevara.
Oh, wow.
Once again, well known.
Yep.
Living that straight edge life. Bryan Danielson.
Okay.
Is
yeah,
straight
I think
edge.
I could see that.
And he also did, if you remember, towards the end of his stint in WWE, he did an environmentalist gimmick with that wooden belt that just looked horrifically bad.
Yeah, it looked bad, but I loved it. That was great.
And he grew that was when he grew the beard out, and he kind of. Anyways, that is interesting because that is sort of closely associated with the straight edge. You would see a lot of environmentalism associated with that.
Yep.
Kenny Omega.
Okay.
Very closely associated.
I knew he didn't drink.
Lives that straight edge lifestyle, doesn't fool around. ZKO.
Both of them.
Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens. As a matter of fact, I looked it up. I had to be reminded of this, but Kevin Owens actually has had multiple works, multiple angles that were like, yeah, like beer's yucky, basically, was the association of it. But yeah, both of them, straight edge was probably helped a lot when they were together in Canada, coming up through on the road together. Probably very helpful. And my last one probably won't come as a surprise, Darby Allin.
Okay.
Darby Allin, very straight edge.
I expected to hear Lita on that list.
So, interesting you bring that up. While women are welcome, you do not see much of it. Most of straight edge culture is cis white men primarily. You do see some diversity, especially within like the Hispanic culture when you get into like more urban or metropolitan areas. There's a decent contingent there, but for the most part, it's a lot of straight white men, for lack of a better way of saying it. So, one thing that struck me as interesting is if you think about one of the most distinguishing features of, I think people sort of misassociate this. I'm not sure if that's a word or not. I think people sort of misassociate this with metalcore, heavy punk, the moshing.
Yep.
It's really associated with straight edge society. The super aggressive aspect of it, where you see people like doing kung fu moves or like doing musical stomps.
Yeah.
So when you think about when I think about CM Punk's finisher, the go to sleep, you put him up on your shoulders, you throw him down, and it's a knee to the side of the head. Very aggressive, very direct. Anytime you see, and I don't believe he's directly associated with the movement, but like Rollins' curb stomp, right, which was actually outlawed for a brief period of time.
Yep.
That kind of stuff. Very straight edge mosh style. So they sort of make up for the fact that they're not high and drunk by being like extra aggressive inside the mosh pit. The other thing that's kind of interesting is that straight edge music culture veers away from the large arena settings. They
for
like
the underground.
Small clubs, stages that sometimes aren't even stages. Like it's very do-it-yourself. They would much rather perform like in the basement of a Unitarian Universalist church than at Madison Square Garden. Like for them, it's very private. And so at some of these crazy events, like at some of the crazier events, like you don't know where the stage ends and the crowd begins.
Yep.
And vice versa. Like it kind of becomes one gigantic, massive humanity mosh pit. And when I think about, let's just take Blackpool Combat Club, which has 2 members in it now, Brian Danielson and Claudio, which are well-known straight-edge guys. What match did they just participate in?
Anarchy in the Arena.
Anarchy in the Arena, where they literally went out into the arena and they participated in the crowd, right? Think about John Moxley, who is definitely not straight-edge, but comes down through the crowd. When you think about Rollins, when we were at Raw and he made his premiere, he came down through the crowd. There's an aspect of that I think is really associated with that sort of intermingles. It's a way that sort of the straight edge subculture has sort of interacted with the wrestling. It's kind of like had an impact. It's the same thing. It wasn't used in the same way, but the kind of boiler room brawl. That's sort of an offshoot of it. Like you're not really in the crowd, but you're also not on stage either. You're off stage. You're off to the side. And the more I thought about it, when I looked at the list of people that were associated with it, one, primarily they're heels. They're all associated with heel acts. Jinder Mahal, Brody King, Viking Raiders, Blackpool Combat Club. The Jacksons did a brief stint as heels, but primarily they're faces. Darby Allin's kind of a tweener. He's not really good. He's not really bad. But yeah, they kind of run that way. They sort of run that heel angle, and yet you don't really see them doing anything super excessive, but they do that hardcore in the crowd, and I think that is just one pretty interesting way in which the culture has been impacted. So we'll see what happens going forward. Obviously, it's very difficult with CM Punk returning to imagine him not coming back with some kind of straight edge
Right.
gimmick. I mean, that's his life. I mean, I don't know how you...
And when he was in WWE, that was his biggest heel run, was when he was lording it over everyone, that he was better than everyone because he was straight edge.
I was going to say Straight Edge Society was a heel
Faction.
right?
Or stable.
It was him, Gallows,
Serena Deeb.
and Serena. Yes, that's what I was thinking of.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think it's interesting to see how these subcultures have impacted, and if in any time you think about an arena match, basically any time it goes into the crowd, especially when you hear the metal. You know, it was funny. Like, they played. If I go back to Double or Nothing, they played a really bad rendition of Wild Thing.
Yep.
Slamming on 3 chords, singing not great, in the middle of it, chaos, anarchy. But only one of them really got color. It was Moxley,
Yep.
who isn't straight edge, who's well known for not being straight edge, right? I mean, he's constantly in and out of rehab. So I thought it was interesting.
No,
So
he's doing good now. Don't want to start any rumors here.
yeah, I mean, there's no sign that he's relapsed that we know of or anything. But I mean, or yeah, it is a rumor. I'm starting it right now. I just think it's very interesting, and I think I'm interested to dig deeper more into these subcultures and see how they impact wrestling and the product that gets created. And when you think about how finishers are created, you think about like strong style and how that might be used. You think about going into the crowd. You always kind of wonder, like, where does that come from? Well, it's bleed over. It's cultural bleed over, and you start to see that. And I think this is what makes professional wrestling so interesting for me, and one of the many things that makes professional wrestling so interesting to me is the idea that it's like a sponge. It like soaks up all of these different aspects.
Mm-hmm.
You get the hardcore, you get the impact of this subculture, you get hillbilly culture, you get like all of these different aspects sort of mold together and sort of add to the culture of wrestling and make it bigger than it was before. And you don't see that in other sports or forms of entertainment or anything like
Yeah,
that.
that's true.
Like, you really don't see it absorb different cultures and subcultures and then mold and change with the culture. The product that we watch today is not the same product that existed 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I think that impact is, I don't know, I think it's really interesting, and I think it's one thing that really adds to the richness of the culture, something that I hadn't really considered before.
Absolutely.
I mean, can you think off the top of your head of any other impacts from that type of thing? Any other match stipulations? Any other gimmicks like that? I mean, I guess anytime you go into the crowd. But when I think about it, I mean, Guevara, who's angling for a heel turn right now, or for a face turn, he was heel for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was funny, I was thinking about it, like, yeah, he does all that, like when Jericho was doing that little bit of the bubbly. Like, Guevara really wasn't around.
Yeah, you're right.
He wasn't around. Every time one of those things was shot and they were clinking glasses or whatever and popping bottles, he was never really around at all for any of that. And it's just interesting to see, you know, I think it's one of those things where now that I know it's there, I can't unsee it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm always going to kind of be like, hey, where's Darby Allin? It's kind of weird that Darby Allin's not around. It's kind of weird. I wonder if there's anything to that. But it'll be interesting to see. I mean, what is going to be the next subculture to impact wrestling, and how's that going to change? Were there any real surprises in here? I mean, Jinder Mahal, but is that more of a cultural thing?
Just because he doesn't fit that mold that you laid out in the beginning, the punk rock, the tattoos, all
Lee
that.
Moriarty too, right? He
Yeah.
doesn't really fit that. It's more like a commitment. And even like, I mean, I would have a hard time believing Owens is a metalhead.
No, that I could see. Absolutely.
Could see, but is there any inkling of it anywhere? I guess he is doing the thing where he's kind of like losing control and kind of freaking out.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little kind of that way.
And just his entrance music.
It got a little confusing to me too because oh, it's gonna kill me. What's his name came out to the end of Heartache?
Roderick Strong.
Strong. I didn't find him on the straight edge list, but Killswitch Engage, very, wrote the theme for CM Punk, very heavily associated with straight edge. I think 2 of the band members are like out straight edge. That's how we are. Rise Against, that's another one.
Yep.
Modern band that's heavily associated. A Day to Remember, heavily associated with straight edge. Very good music, very different from punk hardcore when it originally started as. So, anyways, I think it's interesting. If you guys don't know anything about straight edge, you should check it out. I think it's an interesting subculture. I think the music, especially the modern day music, is pretty damn good.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I'm interested to see, and let me know in the comments below. Any examples that you guys can think of straight edge or what could be straight edge cultural impacts on wrestling, whether it be mosh style, anarchy in the arena. Anytime you go outside the ring and you sort of venture out into the crowd and you sort of integrate the crowd into it, and you really don't know where one ends and the other begins. Theme songs, that kind of stuff, even if it's not out there in your face. I think it's in the DNA. It's become a part of the DNA of wrestling. So I'll be sure to bring it up next time I find it, because I got a feeling it's going to be just about every week. Oh, I think this guy's straight edge. It's the way it's going to be. That's all we got this time. Thanks a lot for watching. Hope you found it interesting. I know I did. And if you keep watching, we'll keep wrestling with the business. Take it easy.